Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I am Nathan Baird from the ND Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
We are still in Milwaukee, getting ready to depart Milwaukee after Purdue's, 76-58 loss to Marquette last night. Sam, we're going to talk Purdue football also at the end of this, getting ready for a trip to Michigan State this weekend, the penultimate game of the regular season, and we'll find out if it's a penultimate game of more than that. But really appreciate the people at the Hyatt Regency here in Milwaukee setting us up. Sam is the only one who'd know this, but I'm wearing the same hoodie as I wore yesterday because as I'm leaving my room to come down here, I took a drink of my coffee and the lid popped off and it spilled all down the front of the other thing I was wearing. And the worst part of it is now I can't trust a sip. Now you have like no confidence in the integrity of your coffee cup. So you're like,
been there. I did it I got coffee drips on my couch yesterday.
Oh, yeah. It's a rough life out here on the road in the Big Ten. Not quite the Big Ten yet for Purdue, but they found out that it is life on the road is tougher than it is at Mackey Arena. Matt Painter had sort of been warning his team, I think, about that, and it came to fruition last night. Cam Jones from Marquette, somebody else. I mean, he was kind of effusive in his praise of Cam Jones earlier in the week and how he has progressed. And they've watched it in real time because they've scouted them the last 3 years, played them, or last 2 years before this, third year in a row. He goes off for the third triple-double in Marquette history last night, 17 points, 13 rebounds, and gets his 10th and final assist. He was stuck on 9 assists for a while and gets the last one in the final minute. So just wanted to point him out. But really we're here more to talk about the performance for Purdue, and this exposed some things. What sort of jumps front of mind for you as to what this exposed in Purdue last night?
Well, so Purdue had double-digit turnovers in the first 3 games. And after the Alabama game where Purdue had 3, the guys kind of felt like they had turned the corner maybe a little bit. Alabama is not defensively what Marquette is by any means. And then Marquette really, I thought, did a great job pushing Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer away from the basket, putting pressure on the guards. And what I kind of wrote after the game was for Purdue to have an efficient offense, it has to play through the post. And it was completely taken away in the first half. Trey Kaufman-Renn had 1 field goal attempt in the first half, and Purdue's down by 7 points at halftime. 9 turnovers and 10 points off of turnovers didn't help. But once Purdue got going a little bit with the pick and roll game with Trey Kaufman-Renn and Braden Smith in the second half, really kept it close in a game that I didn't feel was that close. It was, a couple times a 5-point differential, and I was like, man, Marquette comes down and hits a 3. I think this game is over. And eventually the dam did break late, and the score being what it was looks probably as lopsided as the play appeared to be for the first 35 minutes of that game.
In some ways, this reminds me of a game like when Purdue beats Yale, where like Yale will kind of like be an annoyance and hang around, but really Purdue's comfortably up by like 7 or 8 and then finally puts the finishing touches on the end. I thought this was a little bit like that. I also thought it was a little bit reminiscent of what Purdue faced against Alabama, what Purdue did to Alabama, or what Alabama didn't do to Purdue just a few days earlier, where you've got a team playing on its home court and maybe rises to the occasion and plays a great game against a team that's ranked higher. Excuse me, a big opportunity for that team, and they capitalized on it. But yeah, I think, early in this game, they came out and Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith had this kind of like drive and kick thing going on. And the first 12 points Purdue scored, we're in the lobby, by the way, if you can hear what's going on over our shoulder. The first 12 points that Purdue scored in this game were Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith, just in some combination. But it was very obvious. I think there was 8 minutes. I remember making a note of it at the under 8 timeout in the first half that Trey Kaufman-Renn had not attempted a field goal. And he had only left the game briefly. I think he came out around the 10-minute mark. So most of the game he had played had not attempted a field goal yet. That is a bad sign. And some of that, I think, was Purdue missing some opportunities to get the ball inside. Some of it was Marquette taking that away, obviously. I mean, it just feels like they have hands on the ball all the time. And maybe they won't be able to do that every single night of their lives, but they did it very well against Purdue last night. At the same time, that's why they call this a game. You've got to find a way to overcome that. What can you do to overcome that? And I think that is the lesson learned from this, because that won't be the last team that tries to intensely pressure Purdue, even if it's just in the half court. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, and just so people know, some, I guess, insider knowledge for people who weren't there, one of the in-game promotions that Marquette does is for 32 deflections is you get a free something or other.
Chick-fil-A.
Whatever it is.
We were sponsored today by Hyatt Regency and Chick-fil-A.
So this is not like anything out of the ordinary. This is what Marquette does, and it takes pride in being able to frustrate you defensively. And because of that, I think Purdue had to run some new wrinkles a couple times. Fletcher Lawyer would drive to the basket, and Braden Smith would be waiting in the corner, which is not something they've done a whole lot. Typically, Braden Smith is the facilitator most of the time, and it seemed like they kind of did a role reversal just to get something going. But Braden Smith did not shoot very well for the second game in a row. And, his stat line at the end of the night looks pretty good, or at least okay. I think 11 points, 8 assists, something like that, and maybe 5 or 6 rebounds.
9 assists, yeah. 4 rebounds.
But I don't think he played a great game. And, a credit of that is to what Marquette was able to do. And then the shots outside of Cam Heide, I don't think anybody hit a shot that really felt like, man, this is a moment where Purdue has to hit a big three. Jakari Harris had a couple open looks and missed them. They're good shots. Purdue's comfortable with taking those, but they got to go down sometimes too. CJ Cox, I felt like coming off that performance against Alabama, kind of forced one up early, maybe like a heat check, or like, man, I've now been given the green light to just fire away. He missed that. There was another time where he got blocked, kind of trying to double pump at the end of a shot clock, I think it was, and also missed a mid-range jumper. Riley Burgess didn't get a lot of playing time. This is the first real environment like this. I know they played at Creighton, but this is kind of maximized. You're playing in an NBA arena that was pretty full and was pretty loud. So
and higher stakes. Like you knew that the other one was an exhibition, and and Mike Painter coached that like it was an exhibition. You know what I mean? And the thing you're pointing out as far as like Harrison Cox didn't have shots go down. That's the other factor in why Marquette was able to, because they're giving things up. Matt Painter was asked after the game about whether the shots that Ben Gold hit, which I thought was a good question from Brian Newbert, like the shots that he hit, did that make guarding Cam Jones tougher? And Matt Painter was like, no, not really, because we were willing to let him take those shots. You're always having to give something up on defense. I don't care if it's basketball or football. You've got you can't cover everything. There's a vulnerability somewhere, so you're okay with certain people taking certain shots. And right now, opponents are okay with Jakari Harris, especially putting up 3-pointers early in the game if it means denying everything else. And he had some good looks that didn't fall. If those shots go down and now somebody does have to go out and engage him in a different way, they have to change how they're approaching that. That changes things, or just by making those shots, it changes things. But I thought the biggest factor was still the turnovers. I mean, I think everybody covering this game made note. What was it, about the 12-minute mark of the first half? They had their third turnover after having only 3 against Alabama. And then as we were sitting in the media room after the game, I'm like, it was funny that we all mentioned that, because it really was the next 12 that were the real problem. Like 3 in 8 minutes in the long run of things, I guess is what it ended up being. Like that would have been 3 in 8 minutes would equal out to 15 for the game, right? So I guess it was proportionally right, but it just felt like it wasn't even so much the points Marquette was getting. They did kill Ohio State in fast break points here, 19-4. Purdue in fast break points, 19-4. I hope I stop doing that soon. It's only been 6 months. And 18-8 in points off turnovers, but that 18 number ramped up a little bit at the end when the game got away. For a lot of this game, that points off turnovers number for Marquette wasn't out of control. I thought it was really more the empty possessions for Purdue that is where it was really killing them.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. I can't remember who I asked her. Maybe it was Fletcher Lawyer, but Purdue gets it down to 5 a couple of times and, doesn't even get a shot off. You have a chance to get it to one possession. You've got to at least get a field goal attempt out of it. And instead, throwing the ball away, or, just guys struggling to catch the ball. And Purdue, I think the free throw shooting was 12-18, something maybe like that. But it felt like in a crucial situation where you draw a foul, you got a chance to go there and get 2 free points. It felt like each one of those opportunities ended up being 1 point, and missing the other of the 2-shot foul. That's been an area, I wouldn't say of concern, but an area where Purdue's got to get better against the better teams on the schedule if it's going to compete. Rebounding, I thought Purdue, for the most part, did pretty well. But it all really came down to those turnovers, and you're right. Like, it's not so much just the turnovers. I think you can live with, the ball going out of bounds under your basket and getting back and playing defense more than you can getting stripped at the top of the key and giving up an easy layup, which happened far too often against Marquette. So you've got to, kind of take advantage. I don't want to say there's good turnovers and bad turnovers, but there's some turnovers that are worse than others. And when it turns into an easy transition layup, that's just not even making the other team earn it.
Yeah, there's so many numbers in here that the disparity tells you a lot, even if you don't know the score of the game. Marquette was 5-0 advantage on blocks. That speaks to both Purdue's lack of rim protection. This little light above my head is driving me crazy. So I hope it's not driving you crazy if you're watching this on our videos. That's both a reflection of Purdue's lack of rim protection, but also the fact of how many breakaways Marquette had that Purdue didn't have somebody back there to block it. And it speaks to how much Marquette just always felt like there were guys draped over whoever got the ball in the post. Like Trey Coffin-Renn, especially to start the second half, had some opportunities to score down there, but a lot of times it felt like other guys, and maybe they have to finish stronger through that too. But Marquette was definitely causing some problems down there. 11-2 in steals too for this game from Marquette. And if it's one thing, if those are happening in the front court and somebody's just knocking the ball out of a big man's hands, because then you get to still get back and set your defense. But there were 8 combined steals between Chase Ross and Stevie Mitchell for Marquette. I thought he had a really good game. And 21 points. Yeah, 21 points, made all his free throws. Those guys had 4 steals apiece, and that some of that again was late, and that's where they got those runouts and where they're able to separate. I think we need to talk about the front court situation.
Right. This is the first game where I really, maybe the first game where I really felt not having Daniel Jacobson was clear and obvious that you didn't have that second guy in the paint.
It's not that Daniel Jacobson is like an first team All Big Ten player right now, but just by nature of his body, like there isn't a huge discrepancy right now, body wise, physicality things between Caleb First, Will Berg, and Raleigh Burgess. Maybe they're supposed to be, but I don't feel it out there on the court. So, but Daniel Jacobson, just by his nature of being 7'4" and having the reach that he has, having the width that he has when he's down there defending, changes a lot of things. And it also is an opportunity to, you can get easier lobs to get him the ball near the basket and draw fouls and things like that. And maybe get some interruptions when the other team is starting to pull away on things. But beyond even that, so Dan Jacobson's done. Like he's probably not playing again this year. So that's we can just end that conversation. That doesn't almost doesn't even matter. Daniel Jacobson sort of becomes a member of the recruiting class of 2025, unfortunately. So it's really more about what are the guys who are there doing. And I didn't think Will Berg was especially effective when he played early on. They went to Caleb First to start the second half. I thought he was okay at times, but he was another guy who was just having, I think, trouble finishing around the basket against what Marquette did. It did seem like the best version of Purdue at times is that smaller lineup, and I'm curious if that's something that Matt Painter goes to more as the default, if he feels like he wants to, or if he feels like he gets pushed there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't end up being the best idea, but I think you should make choices based on your strengths and not your weaknesses. And if that's truly a strength, that's, I guess, good for Purdue if he gets to that decision. But I don't know if that's apparent yet.
Yeah, I tweeted, posted whatever midway through the second half, maybe even before that. I said, right now the lineup Purdue needs to have on the floor is Trey Coffin-Renn at the 5 and some variants of Cox, Harris, Smith, Lawyer, Colvin, Heidi out there with them. I just felt like athletic-wise, Purdue was outmatched. And its best option to counter that was Trey Coffin-Renn playing the 5.
Yeah, some other guys, Miles Colvin. So because of where things are in the front court, that even more emphasizes how important it is for these wings to be contributing in other ways, and especially on rebounding. I thought Miles Colvin had a really good rebounding game. He ended up with 8 rebounds. That tied with Coffin-Renn for the team lead. But I thought it was just, you felt his rebounding in this game. I thought that was important. Now, he also didn't make a shot. As much as, I just wrote a piece about, how it's a breakthrough that he's become a two-way player. But one of those 2 ways is scoring. So it's going to come. That'll come eventually. Just I think it'll come for these freshmen. The other thing to remember is, again, this wasn't really an 18-point loss. It was probably closer to like a 10-point loss. Not that necessarily matters in the grand scheme of things. But listen, Purdue had won 39 straight games against what is annually one of the tougher non-conference regular season schedules anybody plays. Like they do it intentionally, and they kept winning. And this was the kind of game that ends streaks like that. You're playing on the road against the number 15 team in the country, and one that isn't, as Matt Painter pointed out too, this wasn't a team that was like thrown together over the offseason, the way a lot of teams are.
Like Purdue built its
a lot of ways, and a team that knows you, and a team that's got a really good coach, and they've been scouting you for 2 years, so they know. Don't you think like last year Shaka Smart was like, boy, if I could only coach against a Purdue team that didn't have Zach Edey, what could we do against them? But you have to change so many things because of Zach Edey. Well, take Zach Edey off of the floor. What does Marquette do against Purdue last year and the year before that? Maybe Purdue had just lost its third straight game against Marquette. Not to take anything away from these players, but Zach Edey does change a game that much. And I thought, I asked Trey Coffin-Wren after the game, this is more like, sometimes you ask people questions that are really more just like, I have a thought and I'm going to just say it. And do you agree with it? And it's like, this team, I felt like one of the offseason topics was like, well, what is this team's identity? And last year's identity and the year before that's identity even was just sort of like scorched earth. Like that team just like mowed over everybody to some extent, especially last year. And the losses were very few and far between. And on the road in the conference, you deal with some of that. Well, part of this team's identity will be how it responds to this, like getting exposed like this early in the season. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, last year when Purdue lost at Northwestern for the second year in a row, I wrote how different the locker room feel kind of was coming out of that game, because the year before it was like, you had two freshmen starting in your backcourt, and it seemed like, they were maximizing something that maybe is just something that happens over the course of conference play. Last year, Fletcher Lawyer went into great details like, hey, we lost. We're going to come out and win the next game. It was almost like they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and were like, yeah, you don't go undefeated. You go 34-5. That's a great year, which Purdue had last year. And I think that, several of us asked yesterday in different ways, is this team very much or kind of like that team last year where you can just shrug this off and move on to the next one? You have to. And in the moment, you obviously have to say, yeah, this isn't, we're going to get better from this. But that will tell. And it maybe won't tell against Marshall, but it may tell in San Diego next week. It may tell against Auburn and Texas A&M in December. I think this team can be really, really good still. But right now, it's got some flaws. That there's some things to work on, and maybe lineups that you have to tinker with and see which one works the best.
Yeah, I mean, last year's team could come out of any loss and know that it just because it lost a game didn't mean that it had big vulnerabilities. Like, you still had the best player in the country. You still had great players around him. You still had a national championship caliber team that just ran into a team that was like a tier above that in terms of how you stack up national championship caliber teams. And this season, though, it's good. I think that they're taking kind of the same stoic approach. Like those three leaders, we talked to the three returning starters after the game, Kaufman-Wren, Smith, and Lawyer. Those are three guys that we all talked to after the game last night. Very briefly with Braden Smith, who apparently woke up yesterday a little hoarse. But it's good for those guys to be able, the younger guys on this team, to look at those guys and say, oh, they're not panicking. Like, we'll be okay. Like, we'll figure this out. I think that's a good message. At the same time, if it's last year's team lost a game, I don't think you could look at it, come out and say, look, we have to like figure some things out. This team does have to figure some things out. This team has to adjust some of it's still coming together. It's still figuring out what it is. It's still a work in progress. And this game needs to be the thing that they absorb. And I think in a different way than they would have absorbed any loss last year, because it tells them more about the team that they actually are right now, and the team and where they have to go to be the team they want to be. Purdue was the team it wanted to be when it lost at Northwestern last year. It just lost on the road against the NCAA tournament team in conference. Like, you're supposed to lose those games. This isn't the 60s or whatever. Like, you lose those games in these modern times. But this team, while it's okay to lose against a team as good as Marquette on the road, the nature of it, I do think, still is going to have to be very instructive for them. Kind of what I wrote after the game was like, the winning streak is dead. Don't let it have died in vain. Like, don't let this have just been a thing that this streak had to end sometime. This is the best game for that streak to end on, because it's just such a tough opponent in a tough environment. But make sure that you use that to make yourself better.
Yeah, and Matt Painter, I think he's earned the benefit of the doubt by now that this will get corrected. Whatever you may think that the problem is, there's probably more than we even know about internally. But I really do think that the one thing I'm interested to see, maybe not against Marshall, but maybe next week against North Carolina State, what starting lineup do you go with? Because I think yesterday was the first time since the first game that it was different looking and, first starting the second half. But I think Jacobson started the first game and played a minute in the second game, and then Berg started since. But Berg started in an exhibition game before that. So that's really been the only thing that's been changed up. And now with first starting the second half, does that become kind of your starting lineup moving forward, or do you go with Coppin at the 5? Again, Marshall's probably an opponent that Purdue can impose its will against and do some things and look really good and probably get back on track. But I'm definitely intrigued by how that looks moving forward, because Marquette is a great team, but there's, Matt Painter's kind of a psycho in the scheduling philosophy. There's a lot, maybe even better teams ahead before you get to, I know there's a couple of conference games early in December, but before you get to January when you're playing strictly conference games.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to win enough games that even these losses will help them in terms of their NCAA tournament. Like, it's the difference between you would have been a 4, but maybe instead of being the best 4, you're the worst 3 seed or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, this strength of schedule will help them, regardless of how much it helps them. It'll help them in that realm, just mathematically. It needs to also help them physically. It needs to help them mentally. That was the thing that Matt Painter came out of this game saying too, was that they weren't tough enough. They didn't tough their way through those situations. They weren't getting to the loose balls the way Marquette was. Like, there just was a different energy for Marquette. Some of that is you're feeding off of the home court, just the way Purdue did 4 days before that. So you learn who you are in those situations. You try to respond better the next time. Anything else you want to bring up for this? You said Marshall is the noon tip-off on Saturday.
No, I think Purdue's fine. People, obviously, I'm a fan of teams, and when my teams lose, sometimes I overreact. It's the nature of being a fan, but I don't think there's any reason to overreact to one loss on the road against a team that's ranked fairly high.
But I get it, because you just got used to a situation in the last 2 years where you looked at like all 5 spots and you're like, well, where are they bad? They're not really bad anywhere. I think you have questions about some lineup spots right now. And even when you're getting good things from some of those guys, are you getting a complete game from both of those guys? Are you getting a complete game from that position over 40 minutes? I think that's a fair thing to ask right now. And it was a fair thing to ask from the start this year, because you just lost the best player in the country who is irreplaceable. Like, maybe in the history of this game could end up being irreplaceable. So it's just I go back to what I said when we were talking about this team before the season, which was it's going to be, for lack of a better word, fun. We don't have a rooting interest here, but fun just from an observation standpoint to see how this team evolves over time. We don't know what this is going to look like on March whatever, when the Big Ten tournament starts, or when they go to that game in Champaign. Like, if are they in contention to still win the Big Ten on that last road trip to Champaign? Like, we don't know what this team is going to look like exactly at that point. It's got to get to that point, and it's still in that evolution process.
Very much so. Something that is maybe not in the evolution process at this point is it's Purdue football going into game 11.
Yeah, it's not. We're in the end game stages for this season, and for probably what this staff is going to look like for next season. There's a lot still kind of up in the air as in regards to that. Michigan State is I think a 13.5 point favorite, something like that, as we speak on this Wednesday morning for that game. And last week was I think probably disappointing to everybody involved in that program, to just to be this late in the season. I think that's one of the things that's maybe been the most frustrating, was that if you're a fan, is okay, we knew this was going to be a tough schedule. We adjusted our expectations accordingly. But just as this basketball team is scheduling tough games to try to get better, this team is not gaining anything from this competition. It doesn't seem like, when it gets into games against team like Penn State is not better than Ohio State or Oregon. It's not that far below, but it's not better than them. And it's probably in the same sort of tier as Notre Dame, although Notre Dame has played really well ever since that Northern Illinois loss. So as Purdue found out, I think the Huskies woke something up that day. But like, why can't you at this stage of a season? You have had some injuries, but it's not like the very best players on your team are injured. The guys that you knew coming into the season you were going to count on the most. Like, why hasn't the tough games helped this team get better so that it could compete better against Penn State and not look as helpless as it did at times against Penn State? I think that was the most disconcerting thing.
And man, you go back to that Notre Dame game and then the Oregon State game, and it felt like, getting beat by Notre Dame that badly maybe killed some confidence in this team, like from the get-go. Because
it didn't seem to at the time. They seemed to kind of, but I think they were stunned.
They said, like, we didn't play well. That wasn't us. I think Kevin Kane at halftime of that game, even I saw him upstairs in the press box, and he kind of jokes like, "Hey, we got to play better in the second half, don't we?" And kind of seemed like a loose feel. But then it just became a recurring theme every time you play one of these teams that are currently in the college football playoff. By the way, you still have one more remaining next week.
Yes. Because whatever happens to Indiana at Ohio State this week, they're still going to be in the playoff if they beat Purdue, which everyone will pick them to do.
The score differential in those games is just mind-blowing. It's like you're not competitive at all.
No.
And, I asked Ryan Walters a couple of weeks ago about minor victories, or do you have to kind of take that approach where, like, okay, we drove down the field and scored there. That's a good sign. That's a win in our book. And he just like flat out said, like he said numerous times, losing sucks. He hates it. He's a competitor. But at the same time, he kind of said after that Ohio State game, I'm not into moral victories. That's not why I came here. He wants to win games. And right now, the losses are just piling, even down to the minute details of driving down the field and scoring, because Purdue can't do that right now either.
Yeah, it's you're getting beat at home, like you're an FSCS team going on the road. That's definitely what Notre Dame did to you. It's kind of what Penn State did to you. Not as much as what Oregon did to you, except for the fact that you just couldn't muster an offense at all that game. And Ohio State, you are going on the road. And I think in a season, maybe you can actually, in any given season, you can take one of those and write it off. And I think that's what they thought the Notre Dame was. It was the worst version of that, but they kind of were like, okay, I mean, things just got away. The avalanche started and we couldn't stop it. And you write that off and you move on to the next week. But I'm where we are now, 10 weeks and getting ready for the 11th game into this season. All I do is go back to the conversations we were having in July and August about how crucial that Oregon State and Nebraska hinge to the schedule was going to be. And I just really want, like, both those games were there to be won. And if Purdue finds a way to win certainly both or even one of those games, like if its offense does anything at all early against Nebraska, if it avoids any one mistake that happened against Oregon State and comes home with a win of either of those two games, not only does it change how we're looking at you, you're not in the middle of as long of a losing streak. It changes the vibe around the team a little bit, the noise around the team. But I think it might have paid off. It might have paid forward. It might have, from a confidence standpoint, they needed a jolt of confidence at some point. And the biggest jolt of confidence they've had is going to overtime and losing to teams when a win is there to be had. And there's only so much confidence you can really take from that because it's still a loss.
The defining moment of the season right now is the Illinois game. And at the time, in the moment, I kind of criticized Ryan Walters for going for two in overtime, but now in retrospective,
I thought it was the right call at the moment. Yeah,
you have nothing to lose at this point. Like, you have a chance to win a game on the road against a team that was, I don't know if Illinois was still in the top 25, but it was at the time.
They were in the top 25 of the college football playoff last night. They were number 25, I believe.
So not the greatest team in the Big Ten, but a good opponent, and would have been a huge notch in the belt. And you don't get that win. Northwestern, you get to overtime, you don't get that win, and then even when you feel like you didn't take the field goal, Northwestern starting from the 40, you still have a chance to stop them from getting into field goal range and getting to another overtime. And 2 plays later, Purdue can't do it. It's kind of defined the season. Like, every time there's a big play to be had or a big play that is needed by the opposing team, Purdue's defense collapses. And then on offense, we're beating a dead horse with the first quarter points this season. And You have to play complementary football, and right now Purdue's not getting anything on offense or
Yeah.
anything on defense, and that's how you end up losing games 49-10, 45-0, 35-0, 66-7.
Yeah, the reason that I would have gone for 2 there against Illinois is the same reason, and I'm in his head, it's a different factor. I wasn't able to get the football interviews this week. Football and basketball happened at the same time. So one of the things I wanted to ask Ryan Walters about this week was, why are you kicking those field goals against Ohio State and Penn State early? You miss the chip shot against Ohio State. You make it against Penn State. So instead of being down 14-0, you're down 14-3. But for an offense that just can't drive, it doesn't drive. It can't drive. It won't drive. Penn State is a really good defense. This offense can't drive against Northwesterns of the world. It's not going to drive against the Penn States of the world. So how are you passing up what could be one of your only chances all day to get 7 points from your offense? Even if it's just one play on the line, I feel like you have to be more bold there. And I think it's, again, just another damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for him, because you're caught between, and it goes, when was the first time we were talking about this? Was it Wisconsin? It was the first game we were talking about this, where it's like, well, do you take the points and make sure you reward one of the few drives that you do make? Or do you, because it's one of the few drives you make, do you have to go for 7? There's no good decision. There's I don't even know how to, there should be a word. We need to come up with a word that describes it. If someone knows that word, I was an English major, I should know the word, but if someone knows the word of like where it's just, I guess, conundrum, like, or something like that. Anyway, this is also, these last 2 games are an interesting juxtaposition between a team that hired a first-year young head coach, and he's in his 2nd season, and he's going up against 2 Big Ten programs that hired established veteran coaches who were not in their first time leading a program and are having different levels of success. Obviously, it's worked as well for Indiana as it's worked for like any program in the history of college football almost at this point. And Michigan State has not had as good of a season, but you still see more week-to-week competency from Michigan State than you have seen from Purdue. And there's no way to ignore that contrast, and that contrast is going to be, I think, incredibly stark when they get on the field against Indiana in 2 weeks. We can talk more about that then. But what's your prediction for Saturday's game? Like you said, it's a 13.5-point spread.
Well, there's when Purdue played Northwestern, I think I wrote this may be Purdue's last chance to win a game this year, and didn't win. Now, by default, because there's only 2 opponents left, and the next one is better than the one Purdue plays Saturday. This is Purdue's best chance to win a game before the end of the season. That being said, Purdue is not going to win this game. Like I said, Michigan State is a much improved team from a year ago, and playing at home on a Friday night. Purdue had a 3:30 kickoff against Penn State, so that game ended late. Because of that, Ryan Walters said it kind of shrinks your window for preparation because you're getting out late Saturday night. You want to give the guys rest Monday. You would ideally like to give them some time off Tuesday, but because you play Friday, Monday is now you kind of have to think a day ahead on all this stuff. So it shrinks the window for preparation time. And listen, you can get Purdue a lot more preparation time. At this point, I don't know if it matters, but you want, if you're Purdue, to have every advantage that you can. And going into a short week on the road, I don't think that's an advantage at all. This is a game that Michigan State probably wins something like 31-14. I would say, it's kind of picking a prediction out of the air right there, but seems like a good point differential between the two.
Yeah, Michigan State is 4-6 now, 3-2 in the Big Ten, so they're still playing for bowl eligibility. Although I think they finished with Penn State, if I'm not mistaken. That's who they used to finish with. I could be wrong. Now, why don't I look? I've got internet access at all times. This is great podcasting. No, they finished with Rutgers. So very much, in both games are at home, Purdue and Rutgers. So very much a bowl eligible setup here for Michigan State and head coach Jonathan Smith. And it would be a good step for him in the first year to get that going. And I think that's going to have them motivated. It's also just, again, it's been hard to pick, no matter what the numbers tell you, it's hard to have a lot of confidence that Purdue will find a way to, if the game is on the line, do you trust this offense to go out and make the drive that wins the game? Like if they're down by even you're down by 2 and you've got a minute and a half left and you get the ball, are you driving for a field goal and are you making that field goal? It's really hard to have confidence in just from a down-to-down performance standpoint that Purdue will win. So with that being said, I'm picking Purdue to win this game 26-25, and it's the least scientific prediction I've ever made. I'm kind of throwing caution to the wind here a little bit. Not that there's anything riding on this. I'm picking it on two factors. Number one, yes, they have a shorter week. That is true. They do have some experience with it this season, which I think helps a little bit. They practiced in the evenings going into that Oregon game. It didn't help them beat Oregon, but I also thought we didn't think that that was a horrific performance. Now they were at home too. And this week going on the road throws some of that routine off. Also, you still scored no points that night. And there's only so much credit you can get for that. But the other thing is night games, midweek night games, I think can just get weird. And this is a program that, as much as the performance on both sides of the ball has been poor, really poor, I don't know how anybody would dispute that. And I actually think there's anybody in the coaching staff that would dispute that. And I don't think you'd have to give them truth serum to get that. Ryan Walters has not been blowing smoke about how well this team has played. But as bad as they have played on both sides, literally, just as we were talking about, literally every single thing. Like, when was the last time that there was like something that could have gone either way and it went in Purdue's favor in like a significant way? Like, literally every game, there's something that goes there against them. And some of that is emphasized because they execute so poorly on offense and defense. But I think there has been an element, small element of bad luck. And when it's been that way for 9 games in a row, or maybe not 9, Notre Dame wasn't bad luck. And some of these other blowouts, not all 9 were that. But there's been an element of bad luck in some of these really close games, or just, again, some of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I'm just picking midweek game. Weird stuff can happen on nights against the teams that are in the bottom half of the Big Ten. Especially, I wouldn't predict them to go to Ohio State on a Friday night and win, or Oregon on a Friday night and win. But to Michigan State, I think it's there. And this team doesn't have anything to lose, whereas Michigan State does. As much as I'm saying before they'd be motivated to make a bowl game, they also know one loss takes them out of a bowl game. Like, they have more on the line, I think. As much as there are reports out there from whoever that this game might be crucial in Ryan Walters' future, I don't know that it is more crucial than any other game that's happened recently. Purdue gets to play with a little bit of abandon in a game like this. And I'm just wild hair, 26-25 Purdue.
I'm intrigued by, especially if this gets away, how Purdue uses its players. Because if you are Ryan Walters and you anticipate that you are coming back next year and you're in a situation where it looks like you're not going to win, you've got to find out, some of these guys who haven't played, what you haven't. And some of these guys, you still have the ability to redshirt while also playing them. So, and Purdue's played a lot of the young guys this year, and we've seen more and more of it. Hadari Hines being an example last week, who got a lot more playing time. Because I think there is something good with these freshmen and sophomores that Purdue has. That being said, with the transfer portal, and especially if you go 1-11, that roster is going to be picked over, and how many of these guys are coming back. But you have to find out, did you hit on more than you missed when you brought these guys in, the guys that Ryan Walters and his staff have recruited?
I think it's another place where you've backed yourself into a no-win situation. Not a no-win situation, but again, just another tough situation, because on the one hand, that is true. I think you need to find out from some of these young guys. People are going to be coming for the best young players you have that aren't ready to help you win yet, but will be in a couple of years. They're the guys who are going to be your nucleus, you hope, for the next 2 or 3 years. And if one of the things that they can come pull them away with is like, well, we would have played you this year, why didn't Purdue play you? You know what I mean? Like, you want to help those guys. At the same time, and just for yourself, you want to find out how good they are and get them some game reps. But at the same time, you also owe it to your fan base to try to get a win at any cost. You owe it to the guys like Gus Hartwig, who've been here 5-6 years, other guys who've been here for a long time, to reward them for that and get them a win. And it's hard to tank. It's like there's no upside to tanking. If this was a pro sport, they would have traded away their best players and gotten draft picks, and they would get rewarded with a high draft pick. But you don't get that in college sports, and you have to. I think there's a lot of to be gained by winning this game. So I'm damn. It's just kind of throwing something against the wall and seeing if it sticks. I just have this feeling that like maybe Purdue is just due to have things go its way one time. And I don't think it's going to go its way in the final game of this season. I think that could get ugly, especially if Ohio State does beat Indiana comfortably on Saturday. Indiana's got to come back. It's reminding me of 2014. Ohio State had lost early in that year to Virginia Tech. And this is the first year of the college football playoff. And so in the next to last playoff reveal that year, I don't remember where Ohio State was. I think they were like 5th or 6th, maybe. They went in and beat Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game like 66-0 or something. Like they just absolutely flattened them. And I think Indiana is just the reality of the situation. There's going to be some motivation for Indiana, no matter what happens against Ohio State. I think it's going to be a loss. I think Ohio State's just better than Indiana. But there's going to be some motivation for Indiana to do that to Purdue in that last game of the regular season, to give the committee one final argument as to how good they really are and how much of a force they really are. So Purdue needs to kind of just let it all out this week against Michigan State.
Yeah, and we'll get more into the Indiana matchup, and probably not so much the matchup as much as talking about the season as a whole next week. But
we'll be recording this definitely remotely for there. I'll be in San Diego most likely when we're talking about that, or maybe I can talk about it before we leave. But I'll be in San Diego next week. He'll be at the Bucket game. This weekend, I will be at home on Friday night, but he will be in East Lansing. I will be at Mackey Arena on Saturday, and you may get there in your pajamas eventually. It's a really tough time turnaround. No,
for somebody who typically covers football and basketball.
It's a tough squeeze. I was actually going to do it all season long. I was thinking, well, that's going to be a tough turnaround. I'm really going to. And then I sat down and did the time math last week, and I was like, oh, no, that's like 2 hours sleep. Like, I'm not going to do that. So, but thanks for joining us. We will probably talk. I don't know if we'll do one of these Friday night. It'll just be late. He needs to get to bed. We'll probably do something maybe Saturday after the basketball game. But look for Boilers Extra. It'll be on the YouTube channel. And read our stuff, indystar.com/sports/Boilermakers, jconline.com/something. Yeah, there's slashes. Look for the slashes. Learn the slashes. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.